I will call this meeting of the Finance and Labor Relations Committee to order. Regrets provided by Councilors Beatty and Bunting. Item 2, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Delegations, none scheduled. I'm going to request that we under the next item that we move up the item 7.1 draft 2020 audited financial statements to go first. Could I get a motion to hear from Mr. Johnston? Councillor Clifford, all those in favor? That's carried. Welcome to the committee meeting, Mr. Johnson. We're ready whenever you are.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councillor. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Cameron Johnston. I'm a partner with Millard Rose and Roseborough, and it's my privilege to present a very summarized version of the audited financial statements for the city of Stratford for the year ended December 31st, 2020. I think you've already seen as a report, you've seen the management report that Carmen prepared that highlighted a few of the points. We have two reports that are coming today. One is, you can see, is the draft statement without the attached auditor's report. And then there's also a report to the Finance and Labor Relations Subcommittee, and I'll highlight that in a few minutes. If I could just bring your attention to the draft financial statements. The first page of that is the Consolidated Statement of Financial Position. If I may, just for interest purposes, I'd like to highlight a few of the issues, not issues, but just the points that are on this financial statement. Does everyone know where I am right now? Yes, okay. Okay, so on the statement of financial position, this is our balance sheet, so our assets and our liabilities plus our non-financial assets. And you can see our cash and cash equivalents in the year. December 30th, 2020 again is $40,503,000 compared to $26 million. That's got a combination of our bank plus also a reserve bank account that is set in place. The reserve bank accounts have got a balance of about $28,076,000. Very good. Other receivables in the year, that primarily makes up various receivables such as water and sewer billings for December that are paid at the beginning in January of each year. Our taxes receivable balance highlights the property taxes that are receivable at the end of the year. Loans receivable, over the years, we've made loans to various organizations. These are the balances of the loans that are outstanding at the end of the year. Investments, so our investments, deposits on account and GICs, etc. We have a balance of $24,900,000. The balance market value of those at the end of 2020 happens to be $25,987,000, so about $1 million up from what the cost value is on the books. Our investment in government business enterprises happens to be our investment in Festival Hydro and Festival Hydro Services, and it's increased from 44 million up to 45 million. Our land held for sale has gone down, which is nice to see. I remember this a few years ago, we were struggling with selling some of those lots. Now the lots are sold quite well back in 2020, and we sold 3 lots in 2020 with a balance of cost of inventory right now of 347. Our liabilities, so that's our total financial assets of 121 million compared to 106 million. Our liabilities, so our year-end payables, accounts payable and accrued liabilities. This is a combination of all of our year-end payables, so, general payables, construction payables, anything that happens to be outstanding, even payroll accruals at the end of the year, etc. We're at $16 million. Deferred revenue highlights mostly is our obligatory reserve funds that we have on the books, and also any other such as what's the Restart Ontario grants or that are coming through related to COVID. We've received money for a specific purpose, and those funds have not been spent. They've all been referred to as deferred revenue, because if we don't spend it, there's conditions associated with them where we might have to return the money. So they're recognized as a liability at the end of the year until they're spent. Employee benefits payable. This is an estimate of our future obligations related to employee benefits done by an actuary, and our long-term debt. And just highlight is that during 2020, there was no new long-term debt taken out. So these represent the payments on the debt from 62 million down to 56 million. Total liabilities of $112 million. Our non-financial assets, this primarily relates to items that we have on the books that we are using, and we have prepaid expenses. The majority of the increase in that, by the way, just happens to be a timing of our prepaid insurance. The insurance was paid prior to the end of the year for 2020. In 2020, in 2019, that did not happen. That's why there's a big swing in those two numbers. Inventory, parts for repairs, water department parts, etc., like that. So these are items that we're going to be using in the future. Same as other non-financial assets. That's tying with some, mostly, I think, Spruce Lodge type prepaids or other items, and then our tangible capital assets. So we have tangible capital assets this year at the net book value of $301,452,000. That's all of our infrastructure, our roads, bridges, buildings, everything that we own on a net book value basis. Overall, an accumulated surplus of $311 million, almost $312 million compared to $293. And I'll just highlight a couple of points on the next page, and then I'll just do a quick summary of everything else. You can see our total revenues in the current year. Total revenues 147 million compared to 137 million. Some of the big jumps, other revenue, for example, has gone up $5 million. It ties again to our contributed capital grants, obligatory income, hydro, other income from government business enterprises. The share of our hydro income was higher in 2019 than it was in 2020. And then you can see some of the other revenues, conditional grants in the year, an increase from 32 million up to $35 million. So overall total revenue of $147 million compared to 137. Expenditures in the year also have gone up 130 million compared to 122 million. So our annual surplus at 17,579,000. And again, I've mentioned this before in the past, is you have to remember too, is that these financial statements are presented on a consolidated full accrual basis. So they are significantly different than your regular, let's call it cash or budget-based financial statements. I think your surplus in the current year, 2,041,000. Yes. Carmen's shaking her head in favor. Yes, your operating surplus was $2,041,000 in the year, where these statements reflect a $17 million surplus, plus also a net effect of restructuring related to the health unit of 931. So we're really close to, and in another adjustment, we're close to about $18,510,000 of full accrual surplus in the year. And again, some of the big things that we do with these financial statements is we adjust for reserve transfers. There's no reserve transfers that are reflected in these statements. Any of the income that's earned in the reserves is recorded as income in the current year. The biggest issue is it ties to our capital assets. We don't expense the capital assets through a capital fund. Those are actually recorded as capital, so they're not recorded in the statement of operations. That's sort of the biggest single hit to these financials that we see. Plus, we also depreciate those capital assets. So that's an expense in the current year for amortization. The amortization on the financial statements is actually allocated through all the different expenses, general government protection services, etc. I'll highlight the total of the amortizations right on the next page. This is our statement of changes in net assets. So our total amortization is $9,342,038. That's the effective depreciation on the assets. So a calculated basis of essentially wear and tear on those assets based on use, depending on the number of years that we've had the asset and the anticipated life of the corresponding assets. During the year, we had an increase in our tangible capital assets of $13,426,000. So we purchased new capital assets. Overall, we have had a net effect of our change in our net assets of 14 million in the year, ending up with a net financial asset at the end of the year of 8,454,000. Some of the notes to the financial statements, we don't have to turn to them, but we've added a few other notes this year. We've highlighted on the consolidation basis, the health unit, for example. Before we used to be Perth Health, now we're Huron County, an amalgamated entity. So we've had a significant change in the health unit in the current year. I think in the past we were around 48%, 49% ownership in the health unit. On a proportionate basis, now we're going down to about 28%, give or take, because of the Huron County is now also involved as well. So there was a big change in the health unit. Our change in proportionate consolidation related to Spruce Lodge has remained more or less the same, 49% down to 48%, very, very small change in there. But the health unit had the biggest effect. We've highlighted a few notes related to accumulated surplus. But overall, I think the statements are fairly representative. We're in good shape. The timing of this, I think Carmen's already highlighted to the Finance Committee, is that with the changes in staff over the year, there was a significant amount of work for the Finance Department tied to the financial statements, but also mostly as tangible capital assets, is picking up the tangible capital assets. That has been a massive amount of work for all departments over the years, for all municipalities. It's probably one of the biggest single items that we have tied to these full accrual financial statements. So if I may just ask through the chair if there's any questions related to these draft statements, and then I'll highlight the other report in a minute.
Thank you. Council Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask, our actual surplus of 2 million plus, is it unusual, or is that something that happens periodically to the financial statements?
Well, I think we've had a surplus similar to that in the past on a full accrual basis. Carmen, what's your total regular budgeted revenue in the year?
I think in 2020 it was what is presented was the 130 or 140 million. Just a second, give me 1 second here. Like we were budgeting for the revenue to be I think it's 100. Just a second, let me get my fingers on it here. Yeah, the 120. So pardon me, 138 million.
Okay, so really, what we're thinking of is, if you step back a little bit and take a look at it, is that a $2 million operational cash-based surplus based on $138 million of anticipated revenues and expenditures. That's pretty close to being balanced in the year operationally. So, well done on an operational basis to be that close to a budget balance out of $138 million. So,
Any other
and
questions?
I believe that's gone to the stabilization reserve.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any other questions on part one, Carmen?
I'll just add to that too. Well, the $2 million is definitely usable to answer Councillor Clifford's question. It is used. We do rely on that to sort of subsidize or offset some of our costs as we do our budgets each year. So in 2020. We used $500,000 from that stabilization reserve, and in 2022 we used $1 million from that stabilization reserve. So again, it fluctuates a little bit. We need to have a bit of a cushion there as far as unanticipated expenses go through the year, but we do try to ensure that that gets passed along to offset or mitigate any levy challenges each year. And then, but for the balance of the surplus, as the auditor has referenced, this $18 million number is really not a cash surplus. It's a culmination of all of our consolidations and our adjustments to reflect our full accrual accounting. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, next part.
Okay, thank you. So the next part is just briefly is the report to the Finance and Labor Relations Subcommittee. Just highlight a couple of points in this. On page 2 of the report, page 2 and page 3 of the report highlights a draft of what we anticipate our independent auditor's report will be on the financial statements. And the key behind this is the first paragraph is it is an unqualified report. So it's, we have audited the consolidated financial statements of the corporation of the city of Stratford, the corporation, which comprise the consolidated statement of financial position as at December 31, 2020, and the consolidated statements of operations and changes in net financial assets and cash flows for the year then ended, and notes to the consolidated financial statements, including a summary of significant accounting policies. And it's in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated statements present fairly in all material respects the consolidated financial position of the corporation as of December 31, 2020, and the results of its operations and its changes in net financial assets and cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. I'll suspend with the rest of the reading of that, but that's the anticipated auditor's report. Page 4 just highlights our independence, and we just bring to your attention is that we are independent of the city. We don't have a working relationship with it. We don't have any bias with the city or the auditor's the audit work, and the audit fee is not material to our firm, so we're not influenced by it. Responsibilities of management on page 5 just highlights some of the responsibilities, and the first one is sort of the key one is that these are management's financial statements, so management is responsible for the financial statements. We're responsible for attaching the auditor's report to these statements. Representations, once we wrap up our work, which is the next day or two, we'll be sending off a management letter of annual letter of representation to management for review and approval. Reportable matters on page 6, just a couple of points is, there are significant accounting policies and principles dealing with the financial statements. We just want to make sure that there aren't any unusual transactions in the year. And where this comes into is if you want a number to change significantly, you can do that easily by just changing an accounting policy. As auditors, we look for consistency in those policies. And if there is a change, we make sure that that change is appropriate and also done on a retrospective basis. So we're not influencing the income in the current year by that change in policy. During the course of the audit, at the planning stage, we always look to a level of materiality for these financial statements. So, and the key behind that is that we want to make sure that we have the audit work that is done in our review of the work that is done is none of the differences that we come up with compared to what the municipal staff have is a material difference or potentially leading to a material difference of the financial statements. And there was not that case throughout the course of the audit. We did not discover during the course of the audit, we did not discover any misstatements arising from fraud or irregularities. The internal controls, there are a set of internal controls for the municipality. And I think if you read for Carmen's report, that's one of her projects is to documentation and upgrading the internal controls, which is an excellent approach. Fraud or illegal acts, we didn't come across any fraud or illegal acts. I report that we didn't have any difficulties in the performance of the audit. Timing was a challenge of guests because again, changing of staff and everything like that, but working with Carmen and her staff have been excellent. And then we've also reported that we've received excellent cooperation during the audit. I think that's about it for this report. If I can just comment if there's any questions related to this, and also as I'd like to say thank you.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I know it's already been brought up and I appreciate it. I just want the auditor to explain again that we had the hold up like of the 2020, and it's somewhat unusual, but there hasn't been anything that council or staff hid that caused it to happen other than what happened to people retiring. So like I was the chair of that time. So I'd just like to be clear that our auditor would talk about that again. It is behind, but it's not unusual, or it isn't something that our council or staff is responsible for. It just happened because of circumstances. So if he could elaborate on that just a little bit, I'd appreciate it as past chair.
Yes, I would say that it happened because of unusual circumstances. We had, you had two key people in the finance leave their positions in 2021. Along with that, significant history and new individuals coming in, Carmen and her staff, that had to learn how everything was done with the city. And it's not a small organization. There was a significant amount of tangible capital asset work that had to be caught up on and brought forward. So, it's the timing, the period of timing between job vacancy, and the change in the staff could easily lead to that. And from the looks of it, we're not going to see that. We won't see that in the future. I think Carmen's policies that she'd like to put in place is something a little bit more of a prescriptive, where if somebody came into the role of tangible capital assets, Carmen, correct me, please, that they'll be able to follow it much easier.
That sounds right. Yep. That's the goal for sure.
Okay, no other questions? Then I will thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your work and presentation.
Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
See you. Okay, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled program. Item 4, report of Destination Stratford. 4.1, Destination Stratford 2022 third quarter update. Could I get a motion to hear from Zach? Councilor Ritzma, all those in favor? That's carried. Zach, if you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm just going to take a moment to try to share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see this presentation. You were sent a copy as well, but it's much easier for me to speak to some of these items with the slide presentation up. So I know we're not completely done the third quarter, but I did include finances up until the end of August. Everything is tracking as expected. We are tracking to have a balanced budget for the end of the year, and there's no red flags there in terms of revenues or expenses. In terms of destination marketing, I won't go through everything here in detail, but we've been exceptionally busy this summer, and the tourism industry has been quite busy. So we're quite pleased with the results that have stemmed and flowed from our marketing efforts, including 31 influencer campaigns and a lot of strategic partnerships, including with Stratford Festival and the Stratford Summer Music, Springworks, several with Perth County Tourism and RTO4 and others. Some advertising highlights I'll go through quickly in the presentation, as well as social media highlights. So everything from working with partners and getting media in En Route magazine to, this is probably my favorite quote that made it into Forbes magazine, Destination Stratford's Chocolate Trails, a Chocolate Lover's Dream. Hard to get better press than that. And working with other media in communities from the GTA to London Corridor and KW to highlight Stratford specific experiences that we work with directly. In terms of social media, which is obviously very important from our marketing perspective, we continue to have healthy growth. And I've shared with you in the report a couple of posts that have particularly high engagement, just to share that with you. So we have hundreds of posts that we do per year, and we continue to see increased engagement and follower growth. Moving over to destination development, I'll be talking a little bit about Lights on Stratford because a lot of work has gone into raising the funds in order to do this winter's festival, and also the committed displays that we have. Some are built here in Stratford, some are designed in Stratford, and some are coming from international locations. And also highlight a couple of activities around Lights on Stratford. And I'll touch on the culinary trail sales, since that's a bit of a barometer on how we're doing as a destination, and also about al fresco as we continue to manage that on behalf of the destination. So here is the vision board for Lights on Stratford for this winter. We have secured everything that you see before you. I won't go through each one in detail, but we'll do a quick walkthrough via the slides. We are very excited about all the learnings that we've had in the previous 2 annual festivals, and are feeling very encouraged in terms of all the feedback that we've gotten and the displays that we're able to bring, and our relations with city staff and council in terms of being able to pull this together. In particular, I'd like to thank the management of Parks Board, who have been just amazing collaborators to work with, as much of this involves the park system. So starting in Market Square, I do believe I've already talked about this display. It's from a major artist in New York, and this will be the first time it's come to this particular region. As we take a stroll along the light trail, you may recall the planets from Tom Patterson Island last year. We will take the sun and we will put that into the Destination Stratford office, and we will extend our hours during Lights on Stratford to act as a warming station. That was feedback that we've received over the previous couple of years. We will also have a large format map on the wall so people can learn about all the other displays. And we'll have staff on hand to answer any questions. And of course, that also opens up another public washroom. We expect to be quite busy with a target of 100,000 visitors for Lights on Stratford this year. We're also working with private buildings, which has been a great exercise. Working with the Condo Association and the commercial entities on 70 Ontario Street. This is dreamt up and designed in Stratford. We're working with a supplier out of BC to help us with some of the lighting components. So this is a made in Canada, designed in Stratford display, and it features 10 25-foot LED pixel banners that will have their own light show, but there will also be some hidden microphones on Ontario Street where participants can be interactive and their voice will actually impact this display in real time. So that's new, and we've just announced that a few weeks ago. The giant heart that's currently in Destination Stratford's office will be moved to the bandshell. And as you continue along the light trail, we're just announced actually last night that we are again partnering with Stratford Festival to reimagine and bring back the incredible display that was unfortunately cut short in 2020 due to the pandemic. So the Tom Patterson Theatre will be lit up again this year as well. So that announcement just went out yesterday. The summer pop-up continues, even though it was from quite a while ago, and we continue to maintain that throughout the year in terms of overhead lighting, the bridge lights. And then, of course, we'll have Affinity coming from Australia. And again, this light interactive sculpture is all about memory, and we are teaming up with Alzheimer's Society here on Perth to turn that into a major fundraising opportunity for their organization as well. We recently have launched the Shareable Moments Challenge in partnership with RTO4. And again, this provides between $500 and $5,000 to local businesses and downtown storefronts and locations to create their own light displays in support of Lights on Stratford. This has been an incredible program, and this will be the third time it's running and injecting funding into the community to support this initiative, but also to support these businesses. Many of these projects remain to this day, and we do try to focus on projects that will last for future years. Recently, we were covered by Ohio Magazine. So Lights on Stratford is definitely taking or getting noticed around the world. And in particular, I've had many discussions with other communities nearby and some further afield, wondering what our strategy is and what our process is. In particular, I wanted to alert you about the Winter Cities Initiatives, which is an international group that focuses on winter cities, and recently started conversations with our city and staff about looking towards Stratford having a winter city strategy. And the folks that run the international conference have started conversations with Lights on Stratford perhaps being presented at the upcoming one for this winter. And we're even exploring Stratford hosting a conference in a future winter, perhaps in 2 winters from now, which is quite an honor. And I think from a civic pride standpoint, inviting 300 to 400 participants from all around the world to Stratford during our winter is one of the most incredible outcomes from the pandemic and the economic recovery initiatives that we've been working on in terms of winter development. So really quickly, the chocolate trail, which is again our barometer of how things are going in terms of visitation, very strong. If you compare the blue on the left to the yellow on the right, those are 2019 pre-pandemic versus this year. We have already outsold all of 2019, and we still have 4 months to go in terms of culinary sales. So we will break records again for our culinary trail sales, and those experiences continue to grow. We're also looking into launching a brand new culinary trail, which I'll have more information about for this winter. And a quick conversation about alfresco. Again, we struggle for budget to properly maintain this. I think that we've done a reasonable job in terms of keeping these spaces clean and safe. And there's a lot of effort around the umbrellas and whatnot. So as I work towards the budget for the organization for next year, we are going to increase the budget to properly support alfresco and make it a little bit easy, especially in terms of staff. So finally, talking about destination management, again, Lights on Stratford is getting noticed. I'm presenting later this month to a municipal conference specifically about Lights on Stratford and destination development, recently presented to County of Elgin Development. And there's been a lot of encouraging collaboration happening. The sport tourism strategy is well underway, and I think that's a fantastic thing for the city. I was at a meeting this morning for the municipal cultural plan, which is just kicking off. And we've also started a welcoming community initiative that I'll talk about in a moment here. One other thing that we've done is pull together tourism advisory committees. As you know, we've transitioned out of a membership model, and in order to have effective communications, especially sector specific, we've formed these committees with some of the leading organizations and tourism operators throughout the destination, with a lot of variation in terms of size and perspective. So we will be hosting 2 meetings a year. One will be in November and one will be in the spring. And that's an opportunity for us to hear directly from sector-specific considerations, opportunities, threats, and that will help us shape our marketing development and management initiatives. The sport tourism strategy I already touched on. We're hosting the landing page on behalf of all the partners, and we're already seeing significant engagement, which is wonderful. So I look forward to that being presented to council, I believe later in the year, early in the new year. The welcoming community, again, this has participation from Stratford Festival, City of Stratford, United Way, and many others. So we're very excited. This is going to start and run this fall and winter. And the outcome of this project is actually to work with the community writ large and bring a definition of what welcoming community means to Stratford, and bring that to council for council's consideration of adopting in an official capacity on behalf of the city. So it's an ambitious project, but that is the intended outcome. And that concludes the presentation, and through the chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Does anybody have any questions? Councilor Clifford.
Yeah, I've been traveling last 5 weeks across. I was down east, and Zach, I want to ask you about Stratford. What I noticed when I was trying to get accommodations, it was really tough. Like, it was tough and it was expensive. Like in Halifax, for instance, it was $300 or $400 downtown. But what I want to know from you, do we have enough accommodations in Stratford to keep people here for 2 or 3 nights. And like, to me, it looks like a problem, but I'm not involved like you are. I just want, and we talked about short-term accommodations. I don't want to get into the whole thing in detail, but just in general, do you have a plan to keep people in Stratford longer? And like, just what even in PEI, like, it was so hard to get places. Are people finding that in Stratford? And if they are, is there a solution?
This is an issue across the board. And of course, at the moment, we are extremely seasonal, and there's great pressure during about 4 months of the year to our accommodators. Through the pandemic, there has been some closures. They tended to be smaller accommodators, but it definitely does add up. As you know, we are looking at constricting or restricting some short-term rental accommodations, which will further make that a challenge. So it is an issue. Right now, at the moment, we have trouble ourselves finding accommodation for influencers and media visitors. So what you experienced out east is absolutely being experienced here. It is a challenge. And but if I take a medium long-term view, the free market does tend to catch up. And the more robust and year-round we can make our tourism economy, and that's through things like winter development, sport tourism development, the more viable it is for more accommodators to be here, and across a variety of different accommodation types. So there's a lag always, and I think the pandemic has made that worse. And we're all feeling it. I talked to many destinations. They're in the same boat. During their busy season, there is money being left on the table due to lack of accommodation and difficulty in finding that. But I am optimistic that as we move into the future and have a medium to long-term view, and as we make our tourism sector more robust, that we will actually see accommodation capacity increase to a healthier level to accommodate the seasonality aspect of it.
Councilor Ritzma.
Thank you. And thank you, Zach, for your work and the presentation. I'll preface this that I know the Boathouse public washrooms are moving along, but with the amazing success and the increase in visitors, what long-term are we looking at with regards to washroom capacity?
Sorry, to washroom capacity?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
particularly during the winter season, lights on season.
Yes. So I'll give you a quick update to Boathouse. We did go through the RFP process, which I think last time we had talked, there was additional funding required from the city. So we've been through that process. And I am pleased to report that the bid process was completed very recently, a couple days ago. And we did get bids that came in on budget. So that project is proceeding. And according to the contractors, this can be accomplished in time for lights on this winter. Now, as we all know, construction projects can take a life of their own, so please don't hold me to it, but that's the intention. So that will add a significant amount of public washrooms from our current capacity of public washrooms, especially seasonal during the winter. Do we need more? I think this will be a great project to test that theory. How much is that Boathouse washroom used? We are going to be also extending our public washroom at Destination Stratford because it was a big issue last year for lights on, and during that 6-week period, even though it was winter, there was significant visitation and there was only 1 or 2 washrooms open. So to answer your question, I think the Boathouse is a major step in the right direction, but there's still room to grow. And I think there's demand that makes it worth our while to consider additional opportunities for public washrooms that are year round.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a staff recommendation offered on this item. Councilor Ritzma, all those in favor? Carried. Item 5, report of Festival Hydro Inc. and Festival Hydro Services Inc. Item 5.1, could I get a motion to hear from Jeff and Allison? Councilor Clifford, all those in favor? That's carried. Jeff and Allison, whenever you're ready. Go right ahead.
Perfect. I'll start off. It's funny to kind of be doing this now. We're almost at the end of Q3, but I'll report on June 30th at this point. First thing to note is we're having a fairly good year, even with kind of the extenuating circumstances of troublesome labor market and some increases in inflationary costs, but we seem to be managing okay at this point. So for the net income for FHI, we're at 1.3 million, which is 365,000 ahead of the year-to-date budget. From a balance sheet perspective, a couple of things I wanted to highlight. Our accounts receivable balance was more than it was in June of 2021. However, the majority of that is current balances, so not arrears balances, which is always a positive thing to look at, that we're managing the arrears as much as possible. In the early spring months, April and May, we started our disconnect process again. From November until April, we're in a disconnection moratorium. So, through those months after that, we try to get everybody up to date so that as we go into the winter again, where most customer accounts are in a current state. The other things to note, we have seen some pretty high fluctuations in our ISO energy bill. If you'll see in my report, we've seen some major changes from a bill of $2 million to the next one $10 million. And that's just the overall energy market in the province fluctuating greatly. So it just is impacting our accounts payable, accounts receivable, as well as our cash flow balances have been fairly unpredictable month to month. But generally, overall, they end up being consistent through the year from a customer perspective. But we just are seeing fluctuations in those short-term periods. If I go to the income statement, our distribution revenue is 273,000 above budget. We're seeing some steady customer growth, not major customer growth, but just steady. And we also were seeing some early indicators of increases in usage compared to the prior year. Again, that's likely due to just all businesses kind of being back open, a lot of increases in businesses being open throughout the whole year, and probably what we'll see as we go through the summer months in my next report will be some increased usage just to kind of a warmer summer than we saw previously as well. The last thing about that is when we budgeted in the fall, we planned for an increase lower than what we ended up getting approved for from the OEB. So we will continue to see higher distribution revenue throughout the whole year, just due to the actual rates that we were given were higher than we had budgeted for. On the controllable cost side, our operating and maintenance costs are relatively steady compared to budget. We were over by 33,000, but the majority of that generally is due to higher operating and maintenance work in the first 6 of the months of the year, and then we move into some more capital work. So as you'll see, as we move through the second half of the year, this number should come more in line. We did have some staffing changes. We had a IT position leave earlier in the year. So you'll see that, and that IT position was mostly charged to our kind of billing department. So we were down in that area. And then also our administration expenses are mainly due to the vacancy of a VP of IT position. And that position was filled in July, but the first half of the year was not filled. And we also had some other items that we will see later in the year that kind of come in that admin category that happened in the last quarter of the year. So that should even itself out as well. So that's, and then just to note again, the changes in our cash flow that I mentioned earlier, just about the hydro bills on the large swings. And you'll see there I noted that the lowest was 1.7 million, with the highest being 10.2 million. So it is swinging month to month very rapidly. So we're just kind of managing those right now with our cash flow. With that being said, we still are on side with all of our loan covenant ratios. So that's all my report on FHI.
Thanks, Allison. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I'm happy that our income is up, and I know I've asked this before, but with and we talked about this on council, there's subdivisions that are going to be all hydro. They're going to be all like that, like they're not planning on having natural gas, and that's going to happen more and more, as we know, with climate and whatnot. But and also with electric cars, and we're all aware of that. We're all going to have an electric car of some sort. So I want to know, like, the report's fine. It's not specifically about the report, but do we have the infrastructure in Stratford? I know we can't be, I know we got to be concerned about outside of Stratford too, but do we have the infrastructure here to facilitate the changes that are going to happen in the next 3 to 10 years, or actually before that? So I'm just curious about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, we have a system planning process that we go through annually as part of our distribution system planning and capital program. We also are looking at preparing for a cost of service rate application, in which case we'll be doing some forecasting, et cetera, for these additional loads, and looking at our system capacity to make sure we can get funding for it, and we can actually build the infrastructure to keep up with those types of changes.
On that, I was going to ask Jeff, like we have our own transformer, but is the one we got, is it going to be enough, like with what we get from Hydro One and here, or is that something that we're going to have to prepare for the future too, as far as our TS?
Yeah, we would review all of our assets and what our load forecasts are, and our use of Hydro One and transmitter assets as well. It would all be part of our review. There is still capacity at both of those TSs at this point in time. It really just depends on how much and where the load materializes, where we need to look at additional infrastructure.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Was Festival Hydro Services Inc. included in that report also? Okay.
I'll talk about that next. You
Yeah.
are ready?
Yeah, whenever you are.
Okay. So on the rhizome side, there's a little less change or activity. I mentioned this the last time that we met, that we're in the process of going through strategic planning for approval. So right now we're in more of a continuation plan. So for right now, we're at the end of June, 39,000 net income, which is 13,000 higher than the budget, but 51,000 lower than at this point last year. The balance sheet is fairly consistent. We are in the process of continuing with our capital asset plans. We were able to spend some money on new servers, as well as some backup spare parts, which really has helped the ongoing operations of Rhizome, the ability to make sure that outages are short if they occur at all. Our uptake on assets has been significantly increased from the previous year, and even that we had fairly high upstream usage, or not usage, time that we are not down, I guess is the right way to say it. But putting these assets in has really helped to ensure that we are not down very often and not for very long. So we've been able to secure some spare parts and some assets so that when something does occur and we do need to switch something out, we have those assets available and can go switch those out very quickly. So that's where we've focused a lot of the time on the capital assets this year so far. From the income statement perspective, and this is something that I've mentioned the other quarters as well, our consulting revenue tends to be the item that is down both on revenues and operating expenses, just because those are tied to labor specifically. So we were down because we had some delays in hiring new positions, and we also had a resignation at the beginning of June. I would say that the IT area, and I'm sure others would know this as well, is one of the hardest places that we've found to fill positions over the past year, and the market for knowledgeable staff is very competitive. So that's one area where we were struggling with a little bit earlier in the year, and hopefully we have a fairly stable workforce at this point, but it's difficult. We're always talking about retention and different things like that. So that's an area where we're down on revenue, but then that also offsets the operating expense, again, just because we didn't have a full staff complement. The other thing, decreases were due to pole attachment rates. The OEB determines what that rate is for everyone in the province. And since Rhizome's costs are very much expensed by having attachments to the hydro pole, so this hurts kind of the FHI side a little bit because we receive the money from FHSI as well as other telecom companies, but it went from $44.50 to $34.76 this year, which was quite surprising and impacts the a smaller company like Rhizome. At least it's on the expense side, not the revenue side, but it was a fairly large jump this year. From a cash flow perspective, relatively consistent. Most of the balances go through FHI anyway, so they just kind of monitor as expenses and costs are incurred. We balance it through FHI's bank statements. Are there any questions on the Rhizome side?
Anybody have any questions? I don't see any hands go up. Thanks, Jeff and Allison. Appreciate your time. We have a staff recommendation at the Festival Hydro Inc. Festival Hydro Inc. and Festival Hydro Services Inc. financial statements and commentary for the second quarter be received for information. Moved by Councilor Ritzma. All those in favor? That's carried. Thanks again. Move on to item 6, report of the Stratford Economic Enterprise Development Corporation. 6.1 CECO update Q2 to June 30th, 2022. Could I get a motion to hear from Ms. Gerber? Councilor Clifford, all those in favor? Whenever you're, that's carried. Whenever you're ready, Joni.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on what Invest Stratford has been working on, as the chair mentioned, through to June 30th of 2022. Based on the key metrics that we collect for presentation, the information is there in your report. Activity remains incredibly high, not only on commercial and industrial inquiries and existing company expansions, but also with our entrepreneurs and our startup small businesses supported by the Small Business Enterprise Center. I will highlight that all city-owned industrial land is sold or in reserve, and 2 parcels did close in May of 2022, generating $1.6 million in revenue. I want to spend a little bit of time, if I might, Mr. Chair, on the Attainable housing project. This is something we've talked about an awful lot, and over the last few months has been announced by our colleagues at the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, so we can talk a little bit more in specifics. This is a $160,000 project. It's matched by the province with the ultimate goal of supporting the private sector and public-private partnerships to add attainable inventory in the city of Stratford. Invest Stratford, as you know, plays an active role in workforce development and in the research, in the surveys, in the feedback that we receive from our employers. Access to housing continues to be one of the hot topics, if you will. I want to stress that Invest Stratford's role, and this project specifically, is looking at the attainability product. We believe as individuals who live and work in this community that community housing, supportive housing, and homelessness are critical and important. And our colleagues at social services and around the council table are working very hard on that. That is not the focus of this project, however. And we choose to or we like to continue to make that clear so that there's the expectations are very well laid out as this project rolls forward. So a couple of highlights again, project management, those resources have been deployed. The Baker Planning Group has been engaged since July, and they are moving the finer details of this project through the system. They're also developing the implementation work plan, and the incentive toolkit along with financial modeling is being prepared by the team from Stantec. An RFP went out earlier in the summer, and they were the successful consultant. Public engagement will begin later this week. There will be a number of different ways to engage surveys, engage Stratford. Mr. Bites on the communications team has been incredibly helpful, helping us move that needle forward, if you will, to get to that public consultation piece. There will be in-person, virtual, all sorts of opportunities for engagement over the coming months. And again, the ultimate goal here is to get to recommendations for council's consideration in the new year, the early part of 2023, things like financial toolkit modeling, incentives, development on city-owned industrial land, city-owned residential land, all for council's consideration. I'm incredibly proud of this project. I think it is one of those components that has great potential to support our employers as they're trying to maintain their workforce. Also, it is the belief of your CEO that if you want to work in this community, you have an expectation of a safe place to live. And so I'll do what I can with the support of council and my colleagues on the corporate leadership team to make that a reality as best as we can. I know that my colleague at Destination Stratford talked about the sport tourism strategy, so I won't spend too much time there, but I'm proud of this one as well. We are working very closely with Mr. St. Louis and Mr. Herndon at the Community Services Department to bring this strategy forward for council's consideration. It is one of the final strategic initiatives of this current term, and so it's always, I'm a list checker, so I always like to be able to check things off the list, and I'm glad that we're able to do that. The RFP process is complete. Engage Stratford is up and live, gathering information. Public consultations have started, surveys are out, and October 12th and 13th will be in-person public engagement opportunities for our accommodation and tourism support providers, our sports associations, and the public at large. And then the numbers, we all like the numbers. Budget variance report is there as well. Nothing, significant here for you. I highlight a couple things. Our events and user fees are up, and that is as a result of our special project funding. We err on the side of no budget impact. So when we apply for funding, it's to cover 100% of any costs that are incurred, so that there is no impact on our budget mid-year. So the revenue that you see there will be offset by associated expenses. And again, we do have the pleasure of having my Main Street project this year through to February of 2023. So our wages are inflated a little bit as a result of that, but again, covered 100%. And finally, what's coming, what's ahead through quarters 3 and 4. Starter Company is open. That's a grant program that the Center for Business runs. Participants receive a small startup grant and 6 weeks of instructional training and support, also network building. Of course, you'll have access to the sport tourism strategy and presentation before the end of 2022. And there's the fall is always busy in terms of our investment attraction work. So the list of the shows we're participating in is there for your information as well. That was a lot through the chair. Happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you, Joni. Councillor Ritzma.
Thank you, Ms. Gerber, for a great report. Covered a lot of ground in a small amount of time. As you have stated, certainly excited about the Attainable Housing Special Project. One of the items that you mentioned was the amount of potential city-owned land for housing. Any idea of what that amount is? Not that it would all go, but that could potentially be part of a project of this nature?
So thank you, through the chair. There are a couple of parcels that we're interested in. When the original report was presented to council, there were 2 scenarios that were presented. There's some city-owned land at the end of Vivian Line and also on McCarthy Road. We're working very closely with the Director of Infrastructure and Development Services on what is serviced, what is ready for development. There will be some process, obviously, to go through with the clerk's team and with the CAO. The potential is quite high in terms of number of units and design. I mean, the world is sort of our oyster, so to speak, in that respect, maintaining all of the various planning rules and regulations that are required, of course. There are some smaller parcels that could be supported through some infill projects. And we're going to, pardon me, we're going to get to look at a few of those through the course of this work as well. The beauty of working with companies like Stantec and the Baker Group are that they have a great deal of breadth and expertise in how to look at creative solutions on parcels like that. So that's also a part of the work involved.
Follow-up, Councillor Ritzma.
Yes, thank you. And just to that end, as partners moving forward, and I'm going to say as partners because I believe this will move forward, will we have input with regards to the density, whether with regards to increasing the height of buildings versus sprawling type housing?
So thank you for that question. Through the chair, it would be inappropriate of me to comment specifically on planning regulations and rules and all the things that go along with that. And you have an excellent team on the planning side. You know, obviously we want as many units as we can in a safe and regulatory way. And so I would have Andrea obviously at the table through this process, your manager of planning, to help support and guide those decisions as they come. But again, you know, I think this is the opportunity to get creative and think as outside the box as we can within what is allowed through the Municipal Act and planning regulations. But everything will be, you know, we're going to look at whatever we can. We're going to look at as much as we can and bring it to the table for council's consideration.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, and it's a general question, Joni. I'm not going to be around too much longer here, so I'm just curious. Like, we've got a campaign going on in the city with councillors and whatnot, and we're hearing about industry that's green, industry that doesn't take up a lot of farmland. And I just want to know, and I know it's through council, but obviously you're in Germany now and you go different places. What approach are you taking as far as land use and industry that's sustainable and clean? I just want some general, like what your thoughts are on that, because everyone's talking about it. So as the head of our, I'm just curious what you have in store or to say about that.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And through the chair, you know, I think we take the approach of, you know, what can our companies do for conservation, not only in their own operations, but also, you know, from a climate stewardship perspective. You have your Festival Hydro team on the call today, and we have ongoing conversations about how we're supporting and encouraging conservation in industry, in commercial. There are an awful lot of great supportive programs that exist, you know, car chargers for electric vehicles, those chargers installed in our industrial buildings right from the start. There are a number of really great LEED platinum type building components that we're encouraging our companies to do. Quite frankly, they're often ahead of even what we come up with, because their job is to make money, and often conservation is saving them money, and so they're making some. In terms of land use, you know, there's a lot of creativity you know, various planning components that we can be looking at in terms of lot coverage, you know, making sure that the landscaping pieces are supportive of, you know, things like green roofs where they're appropriate, lots of natural sort of features on the property. Obviously, we encourage our companies through the formal consultation process to be as limited in their disruption to what could occur on those properties while they're going through the process. In terms of sectors, you know, green energy, electric vehicles, all of that supply chain is huge right now, and I think, you know, you're seeing that a lot in our partners across the province. Certainly along the 401 corridor, there's an incredible interest all the way, you know, from Kingston all the way down to Windsor, and then in the north in terms of the mining of those raw materials. I think Stratford will benefit from that in terms of our supply chain opportunities. By their nature, they're supportive of climate responsibility, if you will. We're having a lot of interesting conversations here right now, you know, about alternative sources, including hydrogen and all sorts of things. So, you know, I think our companies are thinking about their impacts in a lot of different ways, which makes our job a little bit easier in that we're, you know, the suggestions we make with Jeff and his team in terms of conservation and supports, they've considered already. They're already working closely to you know, LED lights versus heat lamps, those kinds of things. And you know, there was a huge push a number of years ago, I think 2005, maybe to 2008, around you know, wind and solar. There were a number of provincial government support programs to encourage investment in those sectors. We haven't seen that in the same way. I think it's to come. I think we'll be at the forefront of those discussions as they happen, and it will remain to be seen. You know, I can tell you that we have incredible partners up and down the 401 corridor who are putting massive amounts of land together. And that's not because they're just going to, you know, put a shingle out and say anyone want it. There's a huge demand right now for manufacturing in this province. And, you know, I think Stratford will benefit down the road, but we need the infrastructure and the land to do that. And I saw Jeff Mr. Graham came off of mute, and his camera is on. So through the chair, if he'd like to offer anything in terms of what they're seeing it from a conservation perspective, I'm happy to yield the floor.
Jeff?
Thanks. Yeah, sure. I'll add. Thank you for the opportunity to partake in this discussion. Yes, we're very willing partners, both Festival Hydro and Rhizome, Festival Hydro Services Inc., working through and with Invest Stratford and through Joan, the CAO, and through her team for the climate change group. Very happy to help potential developers and investors in the area with their energy needs and alternative energy sources, and how to connect those to the grid. Yeah, we're very much on board to support any climate change initiatives that the city is willing to do.
Good, thanks, Jeff. Anything else for Joni? Councilor Ritzma.
I will move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. All those in favor? That's carried. Thanks, Joni.
Take care, everyone.
You too. Enjoy Germany. Item 7. Back to item 7. I asked the clerk, did I miss out on the staff recommendation?
Yes, I was going to bring that to your attention, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Moved by Councilor Ritzma. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We will move on to item 7.2, draft surplus and deficit policy and funding on finance liability. Carmen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to walk you through this one. So this, the as I had promised on an earlier occasion, one of our goals is to improve our policies and our reporting and our, some of our framework documents. So the purpose of this surplus deficit policy is really to sort of establish what a framework could look like and should look like for the treatment of surpluses and deficits. We have I would say what we call a default position, or sort of a standardized process, but it just hasn't been documented in a framework document. So that's the first sort of purpose of this report, is to outline that. The second, I'll say, component of this report is actually a little bit of a tag along or an add-on for this type of report. And it came out of the work done with respect to the 2020 audit and year-end procedures that we did. And in evaluating this policy, it came to light that we did have an unresolved matter of an unfinanced piece of capital project work relating to the transit terminal infrastructure investment back in 2018. It's not uncommon that sometimes that happens due to timing differences between funding a project and completing the actual construction of the project. In this case, we did do the funding for the project for the bulk of it. We ended up with a debenture to deal with the most of it. But I think what happened, and I'm making a little bit of a inferences here, but we obtained the debt financing prior to receiving or knowing what all of our expenses were. So we had an additional $200,000 and change for that. So it's sitting in our financial records as what we would call an unfinanced liability. We don't have any funding source attached to that particular component. The previous, initial approvals for the funding or for the borrowing bylaws did not include this component for some reason. It's going back a little bit further than what I can deduce actually had transpired with related to that. But as many of you will know, this project did end up over budget a little bit, in the sense that there was some surprises found when construction began. So it's possible that it relates to that as well. So again, there's just a couple of things happening in this report. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the policy itself or about that particular transaction, but that's what we're looking to accomplish with this report.
Councillor Clifford.
I will move the staff recommendation for 7.2.
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Ritzma? No? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Item 7.3, Reserve and Reserve Fund Policy Update. Carmen?
Thank you. So this is another sort of, I'll say, a bit of a housekeeping matter. We did already have the Reserve and Reserve Fund policy framework in place, something that my former treasurer had implemented and done the bulk of the structuring work to put that framework in place. This is to deal with some, I'm going to call them modifications, housekeeping things that have arisen since that policy was first adopted. And it's to try to address some things that have happened since then. So tweaking the language for the intent of the policies in some cases, establishing new reserves, which have to be done by resolution and or by policy approval, and just making changes for some of the impacts that have happened or that potentially could happen as a result of the surplus deficit policy. So it's just a bit of a housekeeping proposal at this point, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the content if there are any.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I'd asked the director earlier, but the financial ramifications, could you just explain that? Like, it can be changed by council as they go along. Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
For sure, I can. Thanks for the question, Councillor Clifford. So any policy that does come before council for approval is subject to revisiting at any point in time by any council members. This is really just, it helps sort of establish the framework. That framework can be modified or tweaked or, asked to be brought back by staff to consider other options or other considerations that are in there. So that's definitely, as with any of our policies that I would bring forward, that's the case. Our reserves and reserve funds, there's a bit of a legislative component in the sense that we are required to segregate certain types of money from our general operations. So some of that relates to that, for example, development charges or other types of funds that are, say, like the old gas tax, but the community benefit fund, where if we have monies that we haven't spent, they have to be segregated. So there's some rules around it, but this is really just to sort of highlight the framework and you know, build upon that. So the discretionary reserves, all those are subject to council possibly changing or making changes to.
Thanks, Carmen. Any other questions? Do I have a mover for the staff recommendation? Councilor Ritzma, all those in favor? That's carried. Item 8.1, or item 8, report of the manager of financial services. 8.1, Q2 operating budget variance report at June 30th, 2022. Well,
I'm going to turn this one over to Spencer, the manager of financial services, to take this one.
that's not a new face, but it's been a while since we've seen it.
Wow. So good afternoon, everyone, and through the chair, the report before you shed some light on the city's financial results at the midpoint of the year, June 30th. I'd like to emphasize that there still remains a lot of unknowns for the remainder of the year, and that this report structure is predominantly based on qualitative analysis. So these are best estimates at the end of the day, and obviously they're subject to change as more information becomes available. So at this time, the city is forecasting a variance to budget deficit of $163,000. This is up slightly from Q1 forecasted deficit of $68,000. One notable variance I'll touch on contributing to the increase in the deficit is in the fleet department. I'm sure, as everyone is well aware, the entire supply chain has been significantly strained over the past year due to COVID. This has resulted in a shortage of key items, resulting in price increases across the board. If we couple this with inflation, which is currently sitting at 7%, based on the report from StatsCan today, and the geopolitical environment in Europe, fleet's two largest budget items, so fuel and repairs, have seen an accelerated surge up until this point. So at the time of writing this report, at the end of August, actual expenses represented 93% of the budget amounts for fuel and repairs. So staff are exploring ways to mitigate these increases. However, given the nature of these expenses, it is difficult to undertake given the operational significance for service delivery. So the vehicles need fuel, and we need to ensure that we procure the parts in a timely manner so we can get the vehicles operational to get them back into service delivery. Staffing vacancies have also emerged as a potential variance that could impact the corporation, albeit in the opposite manner. With the current labor market, it remains challenging for departments to fill roles in a timely manner, and therefore variances continue to exist in wages and benefits within most divisions. So similar to 2020 and 2021 preliminary unaudited results, it's expected that these variances in relation to staffing vacancies will offset any negative variances experienced overall in 2022. So staff and myself will endeavor to monitor the expenses and revenues to ensure they remain on target and address and mitigate any issues as they arise. I'd also like to note that in the latter part of my report, I addressed the 2020 financial results. This was included at the time of writing the report to provide an update on the audit and to provide some brief highlights. So since this information has been addressed in previous reports presented today, I will not be commenting any further on that. So I'd now be happy to answer any questions through the chair.
Any questions? Councilor Clifford.
I was just going to ask, but both in transit and with community services with ICE, am I correct in believing that things are beginning to normalize as far as the number of people? I know it's not in here. You talk about the ICE and stuff, but do we expect September, October, November, December to be like back to, as far as transit and the ice use, is it going to be got back to pre-pandemic, do we believe, or any opinion on that?
So in my brief discussions with the Director of Community Services, in relation to recreation, I know they're extremely busy with ice rentals, obviously with the hockey season starting up. And in our discussions, he foresees that there being no further variances in relation to the budget. So he sees them returning to pre-pandemic levels. And of course, that's subject to any further lockdowns in relation to COVID, should COVID come back. Let's pray it doesn't. In relation to transit and in talking with the transit manager, through each quarter, he's seen increases in ridership, and he foresees it returning to levels pre-pandemic as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Anything else? Anyone like to make a motion on the staff recommendation? Council Clifford? All those in favor? That's carried. Item 9, advisory committee outside board minutes. There are none. Next subcommittee meeting looks like will be on the next term of council. And before we adjourn, I've only been the chair for a little under 2 years, but I want to thank Carmen and Joan and all the staff that have made my transition and my chairmanship a lot smoother than could have been. And before we go, I would invite Councillor Clifford that held this position for the previous 14 years if he'd like to say anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is, I've enjoyed the staff. It's been great for, if we needed any help, our director's been great, and as Joan also, so I do appreciate it. And I also want to thank the chair for, even though I wasn't chair, he allowed me to be part of it. So I really appreciate it. And I've been around a long time, but the last time, like the best, it's been really enjoyable because we've had great relations with the staff and with Martin and with Graham and well, everyone on the committee. It's been great and I've enjoyed it very much. So I thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I will take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Clifford, all those in favor? Carried.